You think that badge makes you a god? Lennox's voice wasn't loud. It was a tectonic rumble that shook the first-class cabin more than the turbulence. Julian Crane, the Air Marshal, sneered, wiping spit from his lip. I am the law up here, boy. Sit down before I zip-tie you and throw your brat in the cargo hold. Lennox looked at his watch. You have exactly 60 seconds left of being the law, and 40 seconds before you realize you just assaulted the daughter of the man who owns the ground you walk on. The cabin of Vanguard Air Flight 402 smelled of recycled air, expensive cologne, and the faint, acrid scent of unspoken tension. It was a transcontinental red-eye from New York to Los Angeles, a route usually reserved for tired executives and B-list celebrities chasing pilot season. Lennox Harrington adjusted the hood of his charcoal cashmere sweater, pulling it lower over his eyes. To the untrained observer, he looked like a tired father, perhaps a music producer or a tech freelancer, trying to keep a low profile. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and dark-skinned, with hands that looked capable of crushing stone, but were currently occupied with the delicate task of peeling a tangerine for a 4-year-old girl. "Daddy, the clouds look like mashed potatoes," Maya whispered, pressing her nose against the plexiglass window. She was wearing a yellow sundress that looked impossibly bright against the drab gray leather of the first-class seat. Her hair was styled in 2 neat puffs, held together by yellow ribbons that matched her dress. "They do, Bug," Lennox murmured, handing her a segment of the fruit. "Eat up. We'll be home soon." Lennox Harrington was not a music producer. He was the majority shareholder and CEO of Harrington Global Logistics, a conglomerate that quietly owned the supply chains of half the Western Hemisphere. He was a man who moved mountains with a signature, a man whose net worth was discussed in hushed tones by economists. But today, he wasn't the CEO. He was just Maya's dad, taking a commercial flight because his private jet was grounded for unexpected maintenance in Teterboro, and Maya had a recital in LA she refused to miss. Across the aisle, seated in 2A, was a man who vibrated with a very different kind of energy. Julian Crane was an Air Marshal, though he currently looked more like a man looking for a fight in a dive bar. He was wiry, with a buzz cut that emphasized the sharp, rodent-like angles of his face. His suit was ill-fitting, straining at the shoulders, and he had already ordered his second double whiskey before the plane had even pushed back from the gate. Julian didn't like the assignment. He felt he was owed better routes, international ones with layovers in Thailand or Paris. Instead, he was stuck babysitting domestic travelers. But more than the route, Julian Crane hated noise. He hated disruption. And mostly, his eyes kept darting toward Lennox and Maya with a sneer that twisted his thin lips. "Can you keep the kid quiet?" Julian snapped, not turning his head fully, just throwing the words over his shoulder like trash. Lennox paused, a piece of tangerine peel halfway to the napkin. He looked up slowly. "She's whispering, sir. She's 4. "I don't care if she's the Dalai Lama," Julian retorted, turning now to glare at them. His eyes were glassy, hard beads of malice. "This is first class. People pay for silence, not to hear about mashed potato clouds." Estelle Rhodes, the flight attendant, hurried over. She was young, her smile plastered on with a mixture of training and fear. She had seen Julian's badge when he boarded. She knew he was armed and federal. She also saw Lennox, a black man in a hoodie, and her bias, trained by years of subtle corporate profiling, kicked in. "Sir," Estelle said, addressing Lennox, not Julian. "Please try to keep her voice down. We have VIPs on board." Lennox looked at Estelle, a flicker of amusement dancing behind his exhaustion. VIPs, he thought. If only you knew. "She's fine," Lennox said evenly. "We aren't bothering anyone." "You're bothering me," Julian grunted, chugging the rest of his whiskey. He slammed the glass down on the tray table. "And I'm the one with the gun, pal. So when I say quiet, you shut the kid up." The threat hung in the air, heavy and jagged. Maya shrank back into her seat, the joy of the clouds forgotten. She dropped the piece of tangerine. It rolled off her tray table, bounced on the carpet, and came to a stop near Julian's polished black shoe. Lennox took a deep breath, his heart rate barely climbing. He had negotiated hostage situations in the Sudan and boardroom coups in Tokyo. A drunk Air Marshal was a nuisance, not a threat, or so he thought. "My apologies," Lennox said, his voice flat. He unbuckled his seatbelt to reach for the fruit. "Leave it," Julian barked. "Sit your ass down. The fasten seatbelt sign is on." "We're at the gate," Lennox noted. "I said sit down." Julian's voice cracked like a whip. Lennox sat. He looked at Maya, who was trembling. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "It's okay, baby. The man is just tired." "I ain't tired," Julian muttered, staring straight ahead. "I'm just sick of standards dropping, letting anyone up front these days." Lennox's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text message to Rowan Price, his head of security. "Flight 402, Air Marshal in 2A, background check, now." He put the phone away. He didn't want a scene. He just wanted to get Maya home. But the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. It was no longer a journey, it was a cage match, and the bell was about to ring. The plane pushed back. The safety demonstration played on the screens, a cheerful animation that contrasted sharply with the darkness growing in row 2. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, the cabin was silent. Maya had fallen asleep, clutching her doll, a raggedy thing named Princess Tiana. Lennox watched the tarmac slide by, his mind already on the merger meeting scheduled for Monday. Then the delay happened. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, looks like we're fourth in line for takeoff. Might be a 10-minute hold here on the taxiway." The delay was the spark Julian Crane needed. He was claustrophobic, though he'd never admit it to the bureau, and the whiskey was turning sour in his stomach. He unbuckled his seatbelt, a privilege of his rank, he assumed, and stood up to stretch. "Sir, please remain seated," Estelle called out weakly from the galley. "I'm federal, sweetheart." "I stretch when I want," Julian grunted. He paced the short length of the first-class aisle. As he passed row 3, the movement woke Maya. Disoriented and startled by the looming figure, she jerked awake. Her arm flailed, and her doll, Princess Tiana, flew out of her hand. It landed squarely on Julian's foot. Julian froze. He looked down at the cloth doll as if it were a grenade. The cabin held its breath. "I'm sorry," Maya squeaked, her voice high and terrified. She scrambled to unbuckle her seatbelt, her small fingers fumbling with the latch. "I didn't mean to." She managed to pop the buckle and slid off the seat to retrieve her toy. She was small, harmless, a child seeking comfort. She reached for the doll near Julian's shoe. "Maya, no, wait," Lennox said, reaching for her. But he was too slow. Julian Crane looked at the child at his feet. He looked at the doll, and all the anger of his stalled career, his failed marriage, and his inherent prejudice boiled over into a single kinetic impulse. "Get away from me!" Julian roared. He drew his leg back and kicked. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't a shove. It was a punt. His heavy leather-soled shoe connected with Maya's small shoulder and the side of her hip. The sound was sickening, a dull thud followed by the sharp intake of breath from every passenger in the cabin. Maya went flying backward, hitting the armrest of the seat across the aisle before crumbling to the floor. For a second, there was no sound. Then came the scream. It was a primal, shattering shriek of pain and confusion that pierced the soul of everyone who heard it. "Maya!" Lennox didn't scream. He roared. The sound was so deep, it vibrated in the chest cavities of the other passengers. He was out of his seat in a blur of motion, ignoring the seatbelt sign, ignoring the laws of physics. He scooped Maya up from the floor. She was wailing, clutching her side, terror written in her wide, wet eyes. "She touched my weapon!" Julian shouted. his hands raising defensively, realizing immediately he had crossed a line but doubling down on the lie. "She went for my ankle holster. I acted in self-defense." The lie was so absurd, so grotesque, that for a moment reality seemed to warp. A 4-year-old going for a gun? "She's 4 years old!" a woman in 3B screamed, standing up. "Are you insane?" Lennox held Maya close, checking her quickly. She was terrified, bruised, but nothing felt broken. He handed her gently to the woman in 3B, a stranger who looked ready to fight for the child. "Hold her," Lennox said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Cover her eyes." Lennox turned to Dulian. Dulian Crane stumbled back, his hand instinctively going to his hip, to the firearm concealed under his jacket. "Back off! Federal agent! Sit down or I will put you down!" Estelle, the flight attendant, was paralyzed. She looked from the sobbing child to the badge-wielding maniac. "Sir?" she stammered at Lennox. "Please, you need to sit down. He's an Air Marshal." Lennox ignored her. He stepped into the aisle. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't shout. He stood up to his full height, 6'4" of suppressed violence. He adjusted his cuffs. "You kicked my daughter," Lennox stated. It wasn't a question. "She was a threat," Dulian spat, sweat beading on his forehead. "I assessed the threat and neutralized it. Now back the hell up, boy." The use of the word boy was the final nail in the coffin of Dulian's existence. Lennox took one step forward. Dulian drew his weapon. The sight of the gun caused panic in the cabin. Passengers screamed. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, oblivious. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're next in line for takeoff." "Put the gun away," Lennox said. He looked at the barrel of the Glock 19 as if it were a toy. "You pull that trigger and you won't just die. I will erase your name from history. I will salt the earth where your house stands. I'll shoot you." Dulian's hand was shaking. "I'll do it. Terrorist threat in the cabin." "Lydia," Lennox said, not taking his eyes off Dulian. From seat 1A, a sharp-featured woman with gray-streaked hair stood up. She had been silent until now. She was typing furiously on a tablet. This was Lydia Blackwell, Lennox's chief legal counsel, traveling with him. "I have it all on video, Lennox," Lydia said, her voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. "The kick, the slur, the brandishing of a firearm against an unarmed civilian. It's already uploaded to the cloud." Dulian blinked, distracted for a microsecond. "Who the hell are you?" "We are the people who are about to ruin your life," Lydia said. "Sit down." Dulian swung the gun toward Lydia. Lennox moved. He didn't strike Dulian. He didn't give the man the satisfaction of a brawl. Lennox simply stepped into the space, shielding the others, an immovable object. "Estelle," Lennox said to the flight attendant without looking at her, "tell the captain to return to the gate, now." I can't," Estelle wept. "We're about to take off. The marshal is in charge." Lennox looked at Dulian, then at the terrified passengers, and finally at his weeping daughter. "Fine," Lennox said. "If the pilot won't turn around, I'll shut down the plane." The plane's engines roared, spooling up for takeoff. The gravity of the situation pressed down on the cabin. Dulian Crane felt a surge of triumph. The plane was moving. Once they were in the air, he was God. He could cuff this man, restrain the child, and write the report however he wanted. Who would they believe? A federal agent or a black man in a hoodie? "Sit down," Dulian screamed over the engine noise. "Last warning." Lennox sat, but he didn't look defeated. He looked at his phone. He dialed a number. It wasn't 911. It was a direct line that bypassed switchboards and secretaries. "Put it on speaker," Lennox said to himself, though the command was for the room. He held the phone up. "Yes, sir?" The voice on the other end was crisp, efficient. It was Rowan Price. "Rowan," Lennox said, his voice carrying over the hum of the engines. "I need you to execute Protocol Obsidian immediately." "Target?" Rowan asked. No hesitation, no questions about why. Vanguard Air, Lennox said. Specifically, the leasing agreement for tail number N402VA and the entire fleet's insurance policy. Julian laughed. It was a jagged, nervous sound. Who are you calling? Your lawyer? You think you can sue the government? Lennox ignored him. Rowan, I want the transponder codes revoked. I want the insurance policy for Vanguard's entire Boeing fleet canceled effective immediately. Cause, breach of contract due to passenger safety negligence and assault by federal contractors. Understood, sir, Rowan replied. I'm patching in the FAA and the leasing holding company now. Give me 30 seconds. Julian lowered the gun slightly, confusion warring with his adrenaline. What are you talking about, insurance? Lennox looked at him with eyes that were absolute zero. You think this is just a plane? My company, Harrington Global, owns the leasing firm that rents these jets to Vanguard. I own the metal you're standing on, Mr. Crane. I own the seats. I own the engines. Lennox leaned forward. And right now, you are trespassing on private property. Suddenly, the plane lurched. The roar of the engines cut out abruptly, replaced by the whining spool down of the turbines. The aircraft, which had been gathering speed for takeoff, slammed on its brakes. Passengers were thrown forward against their seatbelts. The sudden silence was deafening. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, breathless and panicked. Folks, we have a situation. ATC just ordered a hard stop. They're saying our operating certificate has been suspended? The pilot sounded bewildered. We've been ordered to clear the runway immediately and cut engines. We are being towed back. Julian's face went pale. The gun felt heavy and useless in his hand. He looked around. The passengers were staring at Lennox with awe and fear. Lennox stood up slowly. He walked over to Maya, checked her bruise again, and kissed her forehead. Then he turned back to Julian. You kicked a child, Lennox said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You thought you were the predator here, but you're just a parasite. Lennox pointed to the door of the plane. When that door opens, the police won't be coming for me. They'll be coming for you. But the police are the least of your worries. Lennox held up his phone. A new message had appeared. It was a dossier, a photo of Julian Crane, his home address, his bank records, his darkest secrets. I know about the gambling debts in Vegas, Julian, Lennox said, using the man's first name for the first time. I know about the domestic violence complaints your ex-wife filed that you buried with your badge. I know about the skimming operation you run from the impound locker. Julian stepped back, his back hitting the bulkhead. How do you... I know everything, Lennox said. And by the time we get off this plane, the world will know too. The plane shuddered as the tow truck latched on. They were moving backward. You wanted to be the law? Lennox asked, stepping closer until he was inches from the marshal's sweating face. I am the judge. Lennox turned to Lydia. Draft the press release. Vanguard Air allows assault of minors by federal agents. Send it to CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and the BBC, and get Soren Devereaux on the line. Soren? Lydia asked, raising an eyebrow. The CEO of Vanguard? Yes, Lennox said, sitting back down and pulling Maya into his lap. Tell him he has 5 minutes to get to the gate or he doesn't have an airline anymore. The Part 1. Conclusion. As the plane was towed back to the terminal, flashing lights of police cruisers and emergency vehicles flooded the tarmac. But they weren't just there for the marshal. A black limousine with diplomatic flags tore onto the airfield, followed by a fleet of black SUVs. Julian Crane looked out the window and realized, with a sinking horror, that he hadn't just kicked a girl. He had kicked the pillar that held up the sky. The door disarmed. The ding of the seatbelt sign turning off sounded like a funeral bell. Showtime, Lennox whispered. The jet bridge connected with a heavy metallic thunk that reverberated through the fuselage of Flight 402. Inside the cabin, the silence was absolute, save for the soft, rhythmic hiccups of Maya, who had finally stopped crying and was now resting her head against Lennox's chest. Julian Crane stood by the cockpit door, his Glock 19 reholstered but his hand hovering near it. He was sweating profusely, the salty sting running into his eyes. He tried to project authority, but the passengers were no longer looking at him with fear. They were looking at him with the morbid curiosity one reserves for a man walking toward a guillotine. "Open the door," Julian ordered Estelle. His voice cracked. Estelle, pale and shaking, disarmed the slide and rotated the heavy handle. The door swung open. Julian expected backup. He expected a SWAT team. He expected his brothers in blue to storm in, tackle the hostile in 1A and drag him away. Instead, the first person to step onto the plane was a man in a tailored Italian suit that cost more than Julian's annual salary. He had silver hair swept back with precision and the flushed, panicked face of a man whose house was burning down. It was Soren Devereux, the CEO of Vanguard Air. Behind him were two Port Authority officers, looking confused and hesitant, and behind them a phalanx of men in black suits with earpieces, Lennox's private security detail, who had seemingly materialized out of thin air. "What is the meaning of this?" Soren boomed, trying to sound authoritative but failing as his eyes scanned the cabin. "Who ordered the grounding of my flagship route?" Julian stepped forward, chest puffed out. "Sir, I am Federal Air Marshal Julian Crane. I ordered the return. We have a level 4 threat on board. An unruly passenger assaulted a federal officer and attempted to seize control of the aircraft." Soren blinked, looking at the wiry, disheveled marshal. Then his gaze drifted past Julian to the man sitting calmly in 1A, peeling the last of a tangerine. Soren's face drained of color. It went from a flush of anger to the gray of old ash. He staggered slightly, gripping the bulkhead for support. "Lennox?" Soren whispered. Lennox Harrington didn't stand up. He didn't smile. He simply popped a segment of tangerine into his mouth and chewed slowly. "Hello, Soren," Lennox said. His voice was conversational, terrifyingly casual. "Your seats are uncomfortable, and your staff seems to have a problem with black children." "Mr. Devereux," Julian interrupted, oblivious to the dynamic shifting in the room. "This man threatened me. He claims to own the plane. I want him arrested immediately for interference with a flight crew and making terroristic threats." Soren spun on Julian, his eyes wide with horror. "Shut up! You imbecile! Do you know who that is?" "He's a suspect!" Julian shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Lennox. "That is Lennox Harrington!" Soren screamed, spit flying. "He doesn't just own the plane, you moron! He owns the bank that holds my personal mortgage. He owns the fuel supplier for this airport. He is the single largest investor in the aviation sector." Julian froze. The finger he was pointing wavered. Lennox finally stood up. He picked up Maya, settling her on his hip. She buried her face in his neck, hiding from the shouting men. "Soren," Lennox said, walking toward the door. The Port Authority officers instinctively stepped back, parting like the Red Sea. "Your marshal here kicked my daughter, in the ribs, because she dropped a doll." Soren looked at the child, then at Julian. The horror on his face deepened. He what? "He kicked her," Lennox repeated, his voice dropping an octave, turning into a growl that made the hairs on Soren's arms stand up. "Like she was a stray dog." "It was self-defense," Julian blurted out, desperate now. "She went for my weapon." "Lydia," Lennox said. Lydia Blackwell stepped forward, holding her tablet. She tapped the screen and held it up to Soren's face. The video played. It was crystal clear. The kick, the slur, the lie. Soren watched, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He knew in that second that his career was over if he didn't fix this. "Mr. Harrington," Soren stammered, sweating. "Lennox, please, this is a misunderstanding. A rogue contractor. We will handle this internally. Please, let's go to the VIP lounge. We can discuss a settlement." Anything you want. Lennox laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. A settlement? Soren, I made $100 million while we were taxiing back to the gate. I don't want your money. Lennox stepped past Soren into the jet bridge. He stopped and turned back. I want his badge, Lennox said, pointing at Julian. And I want it now. On the tarmac. In front of the cameras. We can't just... Soren started. You have 5 minutes, Lennox said. Or I instruct Rowan to dump Harrington Global's 15% stake in Vanguard Air on the open market. The stock price will hit 0 before the market closes in Tokyo. Lennox turned and walked down the jet bridge, his security detail falling in around him. Julian stood there, the blood rushing in his ears. He's bluffing, Julian whispered. He can't do that. Soren looked at the Marshal with pure hatred. He's not bluffing. And you just cost me my company. The VIP lounge at LAX had been commandeered. Usually a sanctuary of quiet luxury, it was now the war room for Harrington Global. Lennox sat on a leather sofa, Maya on his lap holding an ice pack to her side. A private doctor, summoned by Rowan, was examining her. Soft tissue damage, the doctor said quietly. Deep bruising. She'll be sore for weeks, but nothing is broken. She's a brave girl. Lennox nodded, his jaw tight. Thank you, doctor. Stay close. Across the room, Lydia Blackwell was conducting a symphony of destruction. She had 3 laptops open and was speaking into a headset in French, then switching to Mandarin, then English. Yes, pull the ad by, Lydia said into the mic. All of it. Vanguard is radioactive. Tell the board we are disinvesting immediately due to ethical violations. She looked up at Lennox. The video has 4 million views in 20 minutes. It's trending #1 globally. The hashtag #FireTheMarshal is trending, but Boycott Vanguard is moving faster. On the large TV screen mounted on the wall, CNN had already interrupted their broadcast. The banner read, Billionaire's daughter assaulted on Flight 402. The footage was playing on a loop. The kick, the scream. Lennox watched it once, then looked away. He couldn't watch it again. The rage in his chest was a physical thing, a burning coal that he had to keep contained, or he would burn the airport down with his bare hands. What about Crane? Lennox asked. Lydia tapped a few keys. Rowan has been busy. We've accessed his financials. It's pathetic, really. He's leveraged to the hilt. Online poker debt. A second mortgage on a house in Jersey that's underwater. He's 2 months behind on alimony. Execute Protocol Red, Lennox said. Are you sure? Lydia asked. That's comprehensive. Do it, Lennox said. I want him to feel what it's like to be helpless. Meanwhile, in the terminal, Julian Crane was trying to buy a bottle of water. He had been escorted off the plane by the Port Authority, but not arrested yet. Jurisdiction was messy. The FBI was en route. For now, he was pacing the terminal, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls from his supervisor. He ignored them. He needed water. His throat was parched from shouting. He grabbed a bottle of Dasani at a newsstand and slapped his credit card on the counter. The cashier, a bored teenager, swiped it. Declined, she said, popping her gum. Julian frowned. Try it again. It's a government card. She swiped it again. Declined. Says account frozen, fraud alert. That's impossible, Julian snapped. He pulled out his personal debit card. Declined. He pulled out his emergency credit card, the one with the high limit he saved for gambling losses. Declined. Contact issuer. Julian stared at the card reader. A cold dread started to seep into his bones. He pulled out his phone to check his banking app. Access denied. Account locked by institution. What the hell is going on? He muttered. Then his phone rang. It wasn't his boss. It was his ex-wife, Sarah. What did you do? She screamed the moment he answered. Julian, what did you do? Sarah, calm down. My alimony check bounced, she yelled. And the bank just called. They're foreclosing on the house. They said the mortgage note was sold to a holding company called Obsidian LLC, and they called the note due immediately. Dulian, I'm living in that house with your son. I don't know. And why is your face on the news? She sobbed. Why are there news vans on my lawn? They're saying you kicked a kid, a 4-year-old? It was an accident. She was a threat. You're a monster, she whispered. Don't ever call us again. The line went dead. Dulian stood in the middle of the busy terminal, holding a warm bottle of water he couldn't pay for. People were starting to stare. They recognized him from the screens overhead. He saw the whispers. He saw the phones coming out, cameras pointing at him. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. Back in the VIP lounge, the door opened. Soren Devereaux walked in. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. His tie was loosened, his hair messy. Lennox, Soren said, his voice hollow. Please, stop it. The stock is down 12%. The board is calling for my resignation. We've lost 3 major corporate contracts in the last 10 minutes. Lennox didn't look up from Maya, who was coloring in a book Lydia had produced from her bag. Did you fire him? Lennox asked. I can't just fire a federal contractor, Soren pleaded. There are procedures, unions, the Bureau. Lennox looked up. Then you haven't lost enough yet. Lennox nodded to Lydia. Lydia picked up her phone. Rowan, cut the fuel. Wait, Soren screamed. What does that mean? Cut the fuel. Harrington Global owns the subsidiary that supplies Jet A1 fuel to this terminal, Lennox said calmly. As of right now, Vanguard's credit line with us is revoked. Cash on delivery only. And since I just had your corporate accounts frozen for pending litigation, Lennox shrugged. Your planes aren't going anywhere. Soren fell onto a chair. He buried his face in his hands. You're killing the airline. Thousands of jobs. Lennox, think about the employees. I am thinking about them, Lennox said. I'm thinking they deserve a CEO who doesn't tolerate child abuse. I'm thinking they deserve a workplace where prejudice isn't policy. Lennox stood up and walked over to the window looking down at the tarmac. A crowd had gathered below, media vans, police, and in the center, Dulian Crane, arguing with a Port Authority officer. Soren, Lennox said, you have one card left to play. One way to save your job and your airline. Soren looked up, desperate hope in his eyes. What? Tell me. Go down there, Lennox said. Take the microphone from the press. And publicly denounce him. Strip him of his status on your aircraft. Ban him for life. And apologize to my daughter. Personally. And if I do? Then I turn the fuel back on, Lennox said. And I stop the stock sell-off. But only if you do it now. Soren didn't hesitate. He scrambled up and ran for the door. Lennox watched him go. Daddy? Maya asked softly. Lennox turned back, his face softening instantly. Yes, baby? Is the bad man gone? Lennox walked over and kissed her forehead. He's not gone yet, sweetie, but he's getting smaller every second. Down on the tarmac, the scene was chaotic. Dulian Crane was cornered. A reporter from TMZ shoved a microphone in his face. Did you kick her? Is it true she was holding a doll? Get that out of my face, Dulian shouted, swatting at the mic. I am a federal agent. I have immunity. Not on my property, you don't. Soren Devereaux burst through the security doors, followed by his PR team. He marched straight up to the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, Soren shouted, his voice shaking but loud. I am Soren Devereaux, CEO of Vanguard Air. I want to make a statement. The cameras swiveled to him. Vanguard Air has zero tolerance for violence, Soren said, looking at Dulian with venom. Mr. Crane's actions today were abhorrent, criminal, and cowardly. Hey, Dulian stepped forward. You can't talk to me like that. You are banned, Soren yelled, pointing a finger in Dulian's face. Banned for life from Vanguard Air. We are filing charges against you for assault, endangerment, and damaging the reputation of our airline." Soren turned to the camera. "To the Harrington family. To little Maya. I am sorry. We failed you. And we will spend the rest of our existence trying to make it right." Dulian looked around. The police officers who had been standing back were now moving in. The FBI agents had arrived, 2 men in sharp suits who didn't look like they were there to help a brother. One of the FBI agents approached Dulian. "Dulian Crane?" the agent asked. "Yeah? Thank God, help me out here," Dulian said, reaching for his badge. "Agent Crane, you are under arrest," the FBI agent said, pulling out handcuffs. "What? For what?" "Assault on a minor, filing a false federal report, and—" The agent paused, looking at his phone. "It seems we just received a massive dump of evidence regarding an illegal gambling ring and embezzlement of seized funds. We have your ledger, Dulian." Dulian's knees gave out. As the cuffs clicked onto his wrists, he looked up at the terminal window. High above, behind the tinted glass of the VIP lounge, he saw a silhouette. A large man holding a little girl. The man wasn't smiling. He was just watching. The lion watching the jackal being dragged away. Lennox Harrington turned away from the window. "Let's go home, Maya," he said. "But Daddy," Maya asked, "how will we get home? The plane is broken." Lennox smiled. "Rowan just landed the G650 on the private strip. We're not flying Vanguard anymore." The federal courthouse in Los Angeles was a fortress of concrete and glass, designed to intimidate. For 20 years, Dulian Crane had walked through its metal detectors with a swagger, flashing his badge to bypass security, greeting the guards by name. He was part of the machinery, a cog that helped grind others down. Today, he entered through the back, shackled at the wrists and ankles, wearing an orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. The courtroom was packed, not just with press, but with the silent, heavy presence of observers in expensive suits, Lennox Harrington's legal team. They occupied the first 3 rows like a black-clad jury of executioners. Dulian's court-appointed lawyer, a harried man named Mr. Ficketts, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He shuffled papers nervously as the judge entered. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Elena Rostova took the bench. She was known as the Iron Maiden of the Ninth Circuit. She didn't look at the gallery. She looked directly at Dulian. "Mr. Crane," Judge Rostova said, her voice dry as parchment, "you are charged with aggravated assault on a minor, abuse of power under color of authority, filing a false federal report, and 18 counts of wire fraud and embezzlement." "Not guilty, Your Honor," Dulian shouted before his lawyer could stand. "I was doing my job. The child was a threat." A murmur went through the court. It wasn't outrage. It was disbelief. "A threat," Judge Rostova repeated, removing her glasses. "A 4-year-old girl with a doll." "She reached for my weapon," Dulian insisted, sweating. "And that man, Harrington, he threatened me. He used his money to hijack a federal investigation." The prosecutor, a sharp woman named D.A. Vance, stood up slowly. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to submit Exhibit A, the cockpit voice recorder audio, and the cabin video footage." The screen descended. For the millionth time, the world watched Dulian kick Maya. But this time, in the high-definition silence of the courtroom, the sound of the impact was amplified. Thud. And then the audio from the cockpit. Dulian's voice. "I don't care if she's the Dalai Lama. Sit your ass down. I'm the law up here, boy." The slur hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. Judge Rostova's face hardened into granite. "Mr. Crane, in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen men kill for money, for passion, and for fear. But I have rarely seen a man hurt a child simply because he felt small and wanted to feel big." "I have immunity," Dulian screamed, rattling his chains. "I am a federal marshal." "Your immunity," the judge said quietly, is revoked, and your bail is denied. As the gavel came down, Julian looked at the gallery. He searched for a friendly face. His union rep? Gone. His ex-wife? Absent. His friends from the force? Nowhere. Instead, his eyes locked with a man in the third row. It wasn't Lennox. It was Rowan Price, Lennox's head of security. Rowan offered a small, polite nod, then checked his watch. It was a message. Time is up. Federal Correctional Institution, Terminal Island, is not the worst prison in America, but for an ex-law enforcement officer, it is hell. Julian Crane was placed in administrative segregation, solitary confinement, for his own protection. The general population knew who he was. They knew he was a badge. They knew he kicked kids. The hierarchy of prison is brutal, but morally rigid in its own way. Those who hurt children are at the absolute bottom, below the rats and the snitches. If he walked the yard, he wouldn't last 5 minutes. His cell was 6 feet by 8 feet. A concrete box with a stainless steel toilet and a slit of a window that showed only a patch of gray sky. The silence was the loudest thing he had ever heard. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against his eardrums. He had been there for 6 months awaiting sentencing. The days bled into one another, marked only by the buzzing of the fluorescent light that never truly turned off, and the rhythmic clanking of the meal cart 3 times a day. He had lost everything. The house in Jersey was gone, sold at auction for pennies on the dollar to a subsidiary of Harrington Global. He had heard from his lawyer during their brief, tense visits that the property had been donated to a battered women's shelter. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. The sanctuary he had bought with skimmed money and gambling winnings was now housing the very people he used to ignore on domestic disturbance calls. His pension was seized to pay for the civil settlement, a settlement Lennox Harrington had insisted be paid out not to him, but to a trust for Maya's future education. Every dollar Julian had ever saved, every future comfort he had planned for, was now going to buy textbooks and tutors for the girl he had kicked. Julian sat on his bunk, staring at the peeling paint on the wall. He had no phone, no badge, no gun, no voice. His mind was his only companion, and it was a cruel one. It replayed the moment on the plane in an endless loop, the smell of the recycled air, the sight of the tangerine peel falling. The way the doll looked, Princess Tiana, he remembered the name now, lying near his shoe. Why did I do it? He tried to justify it, as he had 1,000 times. I was stressed. The divorce, the debt, the claustrophobia. But in the stark light of the cell, the excuses crumbled. He had done it because he could, because for 20 years the badge had been a shield that deflected consequences. He had forgotten that shields can break. I didn't mean it, he whispered to the damp concrete. I was tired. But the concrete didn't care. The walls didn't offer forgiveness. The sound of the mail cart rattling down the corridor made him jump. It was the highlight of the week, a lottery where the prize was a connection to the outside world. The slot in his door slid open with a metallic screech. A guard, Officer Miller, a young man who looked at Julian with open disgust, shoved a single envelope through. "Letter for you, Crane," Miller said, his voice flat. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't call him Marshal, just Crane, or sometimes inmate. Julian scrambled off the bunk, his knees cracking. He grabbed the envelope with trembling hands. It was thin, too thin to be a legal brief. Maybe Sarah? Maybe she had finally written back? He had sent her 12 letters, begging for a picture of their son, begging for just one word. He tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a handwritten note. It was a printout of a news article from the Wall Street Journal. Vanguard Air announces record profits after management shakeup. Julian's eyes scanned the text, his heart hammering against his ribs. Under new leadership and a strategic partnership with Harrington Global, the airline has implemented the Maya standard, a new training protocol emphasizing de-escalation, bias elimination, and child safety. CEO Soren Devereaux credits the turnaround to a painful but necessary cleansing of toxic elements. Julian stopped reading. Toxic elements. They didn't even use his name. He wasn't a villain to be feared anymore. He was just industrial waste that had been disposed of. Clipped to the article was a photo. It was grainy, taken from a distance by a paparazzi. It showed Lennox Harrington and Maya walking on a beach in Malibu. Maya was laughing, running into the surf, her hair in braids that danced in the wind. She looked happy. She looked healed. She looked like she didn't even remember the man who had bruised her ribs. And Lennox. Lennox looked peaceful. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at his daughter, his expression one of quiet, unshakable strength. There was no note attached to the clipping. No rotten hell, no we win. Just the article. It was a message more powerful than any threat. It said, "We have moved on. You are stuck here." Julian stared at the photo. He looked at the free, open ocean behind them. Then he looked at his toilet, at the gray slit of window. He crumpled the paper in his fist. He wanted to scream, to bang on the door, to demand respect. But he had no breath left. The weight of his own irrelevance crushed him. He threw the paper ball at the wall. It bounced off harmlessly and rolled under the cot. Julian curled into a ball on his thin mattress. He pulled the scratchy wool blanket over his head. For the first time in his life, he didn't weep for himself. He didn't weep for his lost career or his debt. He wept because he finally understood the true nature of his punishment. It wasn't the prison. It wasn't the food. It was the erasure. He had wanted to be a god, to be the law. Now he was just a number. Was inmate 89402, a footnote in someone else's success story. And the world was spinning just fine without him. 2 years later, the boardroom of Harrington Global Logistics was a cathedral of capitalism. The long mahogany table reflected the city lights of Los Angeles, twinkling 80 floors below like a carpet of diamonds. The room usually smelled of espresso and fear, but today there was a different energy. Lennox Harrington stood at the head of the table. He was older now, the gray in his beard more pronounced, lending him the gravity of a statesman. He wore a navy suit that fit him like armor. Around the table sat the 12 members of the board of directors, men and women who controlled shipping lanes, rail networks, and tech infrastructure. To Lennox's left sat Soren Devereaux. The Vanguard CEO looked healthier than he had in years. The shadows under his eyes were gone, replaced by a vigor that came from running the safest, most profitable airline in the domestic market. "The numbers are solid," Lennox said, tapping the glass screen of his tablet. "Our logistics division is up 15%. Vanguard stock has split twice since the merger of operations, but that's not why I called this meeting." Lennox set the tablet down. He looked at the door. "Send her in." The heavy double doors swung open. Maya Harrington walked in. She was 6 years old now. She wore a smart little black blazer over a yellow dress, a callback, perhaps subconscious, to the day on the plane. She held a folder against her chest. She wasn't limping. She wasn't hiding behind her father's leg. She walked with the chin-up confidence of a Harrington, her steps echoing on the marble floor. "Gentlemen, ladies," Lennox said, a smile touching his lips that never appeared during fiscal reviews. "As you know, today marks the 2nd anniversary of the incident." He didn't need to elaborate. The incident had become a case study in business schools, how to destroy a reputation and rebuild a culture in 48 hours. "My daughter has a proposal," Lennox said. "She has been working on this with Lydia for 3 months. I haven't seen the final draft." Maya climbed onto a chair that had been adjusted for her height. She placed her folder on the table and opened it. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of billionaires and tycoons without blinking. "Hi," she said. Her voice was clear, ringing like a bell. My name is Maya. My dad says that when bad things happen, we have to make good things out of them. Like turning compost into flowers. A few board members chuckled softly. I don't want any other kids to be scared on planes, Maya continued. Or in schools. Or anywhere. So, I want to start a school. She pushed a paper forward. It was a drawing, colorful and ambitious, showing a building with a garden, a playground, and a plane on the roof. We are calling it the Fair Flight Academy, she announced, but Lydia says we should call it a foundation. It's for kids who get hurt, and for kids whose moms and dads don't have enough money for good lawyers like Ms. Blackwell. Lydia Blackwell, sitting to Lennox's right, wiped a tear from her eye, quickly composing herself. The Maya Foundation, Lennox explained, taking over the pitch. Harrington Global will be endowing it with an initial capital of $50 million. We will provide legal aid, medical support, and educational grants to victims of authority abuse. We will also fund training programs for law enforcement to de-escalate interactions with minors. One board member, a conservative investor named Sterling, cleared his throat. Lennox, $50 million is a significant outlay for a charitable arm. Is this prudent? Maya answered before Lennox could. Mr. Sterling, the 6-year-old said, looking at him, my dad says you spent $60 million on a boat last year. Does the boat help people? The room went dead silent. Then Soren Devereux threw his head back and laughed. She has you there, Sterling, Soren said, wiping his eyes. He stood up. Vanguard Air will match the donation, and we will provide free lifetime travel for any family the foundation represents. We want to be the wings of this operation. Sterling looked at the girl, then at Lennox, and finally cracked a smile. Motion to approve? Seconded, 3 voices said in unison. The room broke into applause. Maya beamed, her smile lighting up the austere room. It was the smile of a girl who had taken a kick and turned it into a crusade. Later that evening, the penthouse was quiet. The city noise was just a hum far below. Lennox tucked Maya into bed. Her room was a galaxy of glow-in-the-dark stars projected onto the ceiling. She was clutching a new doll, this one dressed in an astronaut's suit. Daddy? She asked, her voice sleepy. Yes, Bug. Lennox sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a stray braid from her forehead. Is the bad man still in the cage? Lennox paused. The question caught him off guard. He thought of Julian Crane. He thought of the reports he still received from Rowan. Crane's solitary confinement, his deteriorating mental state, the total isolation. He is, Lennox said softly. He's where he can't hurt anyone ever again. Does he have a doll? Maya asked. Lennox blinked. No, sweetie, he doesn't. Maya frowned. That's sad. Maybe if he had a doll, he wouldn't be so mean. Lennox felt a lump in his throat. The innocence was staggering. Even after everything, she still tried to solve the problem with kindness. He's the past, Maya, Lennox whispered. You are the future. Okay, she whispered, her eyes closing. I like the future better. Lennox waited until her breathing evened out. He kissed her forehead, stood up, and walked out to the balcony. The night air was cool. He loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of amber liquid. He looked up at the night sky, watching the blinking lights of a jet climbing out of LAX, heading east. He had destroyed a man to save his daughter. He had brought an airline to its knees to teach a lesson. Some called it ruthlessness. Lennox called it fatherhood. He felt no guilt, only a fierce, protective satisfaction. He pulled out his phone. He had one last message to send. It was a capstone, a final closing of the book. He opened his contacts and found the number for the warden of Terminal Island. Text. Please ensure inmate 89402 receives a tangerine with his breakfast tomorrow. Tell him it's from the VIP section. Lennox hit send. It was petty. It was arrogant. But it was the final period on the sentence. It was a reminder that while Julian sat in a cage, the man in the hoodie, The boy he had disrespected was watching from the sky. He put the phone away and walked back inside to the warmth of his home. The air was clear. The turbulence was over. The story of Lennox Harrington and Julian Crane isn't just a drama about a billionaire and a bully. It's a mirror. Julian Crane thought power came from a badge, from a gun, from the ability to make others afraid. He mistook fear for respect. But real power? Real power is quiet. Real power is peeling a tangerine for your child while the world burns around you. Real power is the ability to protect what you love, not by shouting, but by acting. Julian's karma wasn't just prison. It was the realization that in his arrogance he kicked a sleeping lion. He forgot the golden rule of the skies and of life. You never know who is sitting in the seat next to you. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice and the ultimate takedown, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. We post new stories of karma, revenge, and justice every single week. Don't be a Julian, be a Lennox. Protect your own, stand your ground, and always, always be careful who you mess with.